One of those games, obviously, Tennessee hosting Chattanooga. Josh Ward joins us from the Sports Animal in Knoxville. One of the hosts of Josh and Swain. Swain is the other host of Josh and Swain. So there's that. Josh, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm good. I heard this morning they were talking about it's always the Jason Swain show, which I agree with. So a couple times today I made sure really it's the Jason Swain show, and I appreciate him having me along. He'll also be mad at me for saying that.
Scoring point guard. Scoring point. People ask me like my job responsibility. I'm like, I lob passes and look for my shot every once in a while. That's
Lob City. If I get to the free throw line a couple of times, I'm happy to try to knock him down. But we're a Jason Swain day away as well. So today's always a big day. One day away, he rocked the number one for Tennessee.
Yes, he did. He was a hell of a player and all-around good guy, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So Tennessee and Chattanooga tomorrow. Tennessee, a 38.5-point favorite, ranked 15th in the country. Chattanooga comes in ranked number 8 in the FCS poll, favored to win the SoCon. 11:45 a.m. Central. You can catch it right here on 104.5 The Zone. How excited is your market, the Knoxville, as a market for football season to begin?
Yeah, so excited. And the energy, I don't think, is really slowed down. Maybe late July, early August, you got school starting back up and people are kind of spread out. But you get to this point in the month, you get to the end of August, Tennessee was in a position for a few years where it's like, they might go 5-7, 6-6, maybe 7-5, and people would still be excited for the start of the season. Now the conversation is, I think 10 or 11 wins. I think college football playoff. I think maybe SEC title run. Like, that's part of the conversation right now. That is a different level of energy. So we were out on a remote today with our show, and the people where we were just talking about Knoxville feels a little different when it's a football Friday. Even after watching the baseball team make a run to winning the national title, or when the basketball team was doing what it did, the energy is there really 12 months out of the year, but it's different with football, and it's heightened right now.
Yeah, it's interesting when I've talked with, like, obviously I have a lot of friends that are Tennessee people. And, ultimately they're always like, well, what do you think about this season? And I'm like, well, if I break it down, there are 4 games. If they split them, they win 10, right? But Vegas has them at 8.5. It was 9. Vegas has them at 8.5. They have them at 6th in the SEC. So, in terms of like where Vegas thinks Tennessee is a little different than where Tennessee fan thinks they are. Who's right, I guess, is the question. Yeah,
so with all the people that think 10-2 or better, I've said, hey, if you're really confident, and I'm not telling you what to do with your money, but there is an opportunity to make money with your confidence. So the put your money where your mouth is, that's there with a real golden opportunity. And I asked Swain a week ago on our show, did I get caught in the August trap? Because he and I had both been kind of in the 9-3 range, maybe 10-2. We talked about this at Media Days, and I think we talked about 9-3 maybe being a cop-out, maybe not according to the odds makers at this point. But last week I said, you know what, I think they'll go 10-2. But I did, Brent, kind of do what you mentioned there. I broke it down to, I said 5 games. So NC State, Oklahoma, Florida, Alabama, Georgia. Can Tennessee go 3-2 in those 5 games and then avoid any major upset? Because that's what it would be in the other 7. It would be, there'd be double-digit favorites, I think, in any of those other games. They have to go to Arkansas. That's a little bit tricky, but that would be a big upset, I think, if Tennessee were to lose that game. So if they can manage 3-2 in those other 5 that I mentioned, I think that can get them to 10-2. So 8.5 feels low. If Tennessee goes 8-4, and it's not because of some serious injury, like if Nico gets hurt, that changes the conversation. But 8-4 would be a tremendous disappointment, I think, to everybody connected to UT, fans, the coaches, the players, people in that building that are working every day to do a lot better than that.
Yeah, and listen, we've been told by our gambling people like not to get too caught up in the first game, like let a couple of data points hit before you get overly excited or pessimistic. But man, watching NC State last night, I think Tennessee's going to run them.
That's an example probably of what they're talking about. You do have to be careful. but
that's it. Josh, a voice of reason.
Right. Yeah, there's a reason that point was made, Brett. But who wasn't watching NC State's offensive line kind of work its way through the game and think, okay, well, James Pierce Jr., And those guys in the middle, Amari Thomas and Omar Norman-Lott and Bryson Easton, and the depth of bodies that Tennessee will have on the defensive line.
Yeah.
Who wasn't watching that thinking that's a huge advantage for Tennessee if it carries over into next week? Now, Tennessee has to go show what it can do. And if Tennessee, for some reason, limps along the way over 4 quarters on Saturday, we might reset the conversation. But I think Tennessee's going to win next week, and we'll talk about that then. But the confidence for Tennessee and Tennessee fans grew last night because of the way NC State played and at times struggled against Western Carolina.
Josh Ward with us from the Sports Animal in Knoxville, breaking down Tennessee Chattanooga, which we haven't done yet.
Josh, I love that you hit on people saying it feels different. And the reason it feels different, and I'll say this, especially in my era, without question, but because, man, regardless of what you do, the sport that butters the bread is football. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, it's okay for everybody else to set the table and everything, but nobody's going to eat. Everybody will sit at the table with their fork and spoon in hand, pounding on the table, waiting on football to arrive. And that's where we are. I think that, for me, is the feeling when you're looking at what's going on up there. Baseball's at the table. Basketball's at the table. The new hire with the Lady Vols, Coach Kim, they're at the table. Softball's at the table. Track and field, like everybody's at the table, and the pounding is getting louder. Josh, like how do you put a blanket on that a little bit to kind of temper temptations of going all the way off the ledge of this thing?
Well, from time to time, I try and realize that is a failed attempt every time. So I stop trying, and I allow what's going to happen with the excitement and the build-up to just work its way through. And then if we need to reset at some point, we'll do that. Yeah. And all those sports you mentioned, the coverage there, the excitement, the connection with fans, I think it's amplified. But also, if football weren't back in the position it's in right now, where it's being talked about as a preseason top 15 team, as a potential playoff team, they went 11-2 last year, selling out season tickets months ago. If that weren't happening, is Tony Vitello a $3 million baseball coach, the highest paid coach in the country? Probably not. So I still think football is lifting up because of the success it's had.
Yes.
And now I think Josh Heupel looks at it and says, okay, we need to be next. He has really high expectations for himself, for his team. We've talked about the confidence he has in this group. I think that's genuine. And then they just have to go out and do it. And Ron, when you were at Tennessee, the expectation was at least go compete for championships. And now the conversation has changed a little bit with the 12-team playoff. Like the preseason talk for Tennessee football this year is louder and more excited among the fan base than it has been in a long time. I think the only real comparable preseason conversation is 2016 when the Vols were picked to win the East that year as a preseason top 10 team. But even then, it was a 4-team playoff, and it was known how difficult that would be. Now there's the 12-team opportunity. Be one of the top 11 because you'll get a group of 5 team in, but it's the opportunity, it's the personality, it's Nico, if we're being honest too, what he will be able to do individually. All of that though adds up to just an incredible amount of excitement and probably more confidence because basketball went to the Elite Eight, won another SEC title. The baseball team won the national championship. So some of that fear that can still exist, I think it's a little lighter than it was just a couple years ago.
Okay, you've been up there in the mix, Josh, and let's talk about the guy that's not really being talked about that much, who doesn't have a lot of weight on his shoulders, and that's a guy like Dylan Sampson. Like, I was going to go Nico there, but Dylan Sampson, man, is a guy who's itching, it seems, to have that breakout season when you sit behind guys like a Jalen Wright. You see what Jabari Small, all of these guys getting their opportunity to get to the next level, and it's like, man, I know they talking about Nico. I know they talking about Brew. I know they talking about Squirrel, but I got something to say.
Yeah, we were talking earlier today that the passing game for Tennessee just continues to get so much attention, and it should be talked about. Nico should be talked about. Right. I'm not saying that it shouldn't, but there probably should be more shared conversation with the importance of the running game, what that does for this offense, and if that's the case, that brings us back to Dylan, who I think is really eager to show what he can do as RB1. He started to show us in the bowl game. He had a really good performance against Iowa.
Yes.
And think about the start of last season against Virginia. He comes out, has 4 touchdowns. He's wearing number 6. Fans are making the comparison to Alvin Kamara. We know that he's a playmaker. Now he gets an opportunity to carry the load a lot more, at least, than he has before as a part of a 3-man group. This weekend's interesting, though, because they were very careful with him during the offseason and during fall camp, and they also needed to get some younger guys some reps, some more work to get them ready. Let's see what happens this weekend. So I don't know how much Dylan Sampson's going to play. I'm sure he wants to be in as long as coaches will allow him to carry the football, get his touches, get his yards, try to get in the end zone. Right. But they have Deshaun Bishop, who has, I think, earned an opportunity to show what he can do. Cam Seldon is back. Let's see how much work he gets, because he was just elevated to full contact within the last couple of weeks, probably.
Right.
And then a freshman in Peyton Lewis. So they need to get those guys work. They have to protect Dylan Sampson, but make no mistake, he wants to be on the field, and if he is, he's going to make plays in this offense.
I think when you look at the wide receiver position, they're going to trot out starters, that's for sure. But there are going to be plenty of reps to go around, right? As they try to figure out like what the rotation is moving forward. How do you think that works itself out in terms of how many receivers they use, like when we get into the conference schedule and things like that, Josh?
Yeah, that's the real question, because I'm sure they'll play a lot of guys tomorrow without much hesitation. I think that's the case across the board. As long as the game goes about as planned as coaches think, then they're going to play as many guys as possible. But the competition at receiver is more real this year. There wasn't much of it last year. Like Dante Thornton, we've talked about him coming in, and he essentially had a role right away. He showed up as one of the best athletes on the team, but he was there at the slot position as kind of like their big four a year ago, and he just didn't have a great season. I think he's better now. He's in a better spot, but he's also had to compete. Chris Brazzell comes in and makes the competition better. Chaz Nimrod is a year older, and Caleb Webb is. They've made the competition better, plus Squirrel and Brew coming back from injury. They'll help kind of lead the way. Nathan Laycock is that guy that I think they really like how he's progressed. I, right now, doubt that he is a part of that rotation. Then there's Mike Matthews. So we're talking about 6, 7, maybe 8 guys that they are legitimately happy with if they were to be used, but they're not going to play all of those guys, I don't think, in SEC play. So I don't think tomorrow answers that question. I don't even know if the NC State game does, depending on how it goes. We'll find out, but they've talked about going 5, 6 deep, being deeper in the rotation. But at some point, the players have to show the coaches on the field on Saturdays that they deserve that opportunity. It's not going to be all about what happened in July with summer workouts and with August, because we've seen the coaches like it to be a little bit shorter. The players, I think, in game action are going to have to prove to the coaches that they want that rotation in the SEC to be deeper.
Josh Ward with us on 3HL. I think the secondary is kind of like the wide receiver position. They're going to throw a lot of guys out there. A lot of guys are going to get reps. Maybe it matters who starts. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But that's an opportunity for a lot of guys to earn more playing time as we go through the season.
Yeah, that's a spot where I don't think the confidence in the secondary is where it is with the wide receivers, player by player. But there are guys that they really like Jermon McCoy, a transfer from Oregon State. They really like him. I think that the coaches believe they got the right guy coming in the transfer portal. Ricky Gibson, who was dealing with a hamstring injury in the middle part of camp. So let's see what his status is for this weekend. You got to be careful there. They need him. Jordan Matthews is a second-year guy, just like Ricky Gibson. And then the guy that we get questions about, that fans are talking about, maybe as much as anybody besides Nico or James Pierce Jr., is Boo Carter. Fans are so excited to see Boo and what he can do, one of the most talented or most athletic freshmen in the country. But there's also Christian Harrison, who to this point has earned the coach's trust to where he's the next one up, with Jordan Thomas lost for the season at Star. But this is a game where both should play. So Christian Harrison is going to have to play well to hold off Boo Carter, because he has talent, he has playmaking ability, but he's a freshman, and how much is the defensive staff going to trust a freshman there in the secondary? Safety is a question going in. So they have a lot of guys. They're really deep, but it's a whole new secondary from what Tennessee had a year ago. That, I think, is easily the biggest question among position groups heading into the start of the season.
One thing that I think we seem to leave out a lot of times, because you get a high-powered offense, you get a guy like James Pierce, and they tend to overshadow guys. But Coach Eckler and his special teams, like you saw a guy last year who was itching to make a play every time. And I think, didn't he get picked up with the
Seahawks, I think? No, not the Seahawks.
Somebody on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Somebody on the West Coast.
D. Williams?
Yeah, D. Williams.
Seahawks.
Seahawks, okay, yeah. So, who fills that void? Because I think last year that was some of the things that kept them in games and kind of took over games for them as well, and kind of put them away.
Yeah, so during the spring and summer, I think that's another area where fans said, let's see Boo Carter return punts because of his playmaking ability. And before he arrived, part of the conversation was, is it defense or offense for Boo? Because he's such a special playmaker with the ball in his hands.
Yep.
But I think starting out, I think it's Squirrel White, a guy who's older, more trusted. If they're trying to get Boo ready to help in the secondary, they probably want to take a little bit off his plate and not have him thinking what he's doing as a return man along with in the secondary. Maybe that changes as the season goes along. But as a punt returner, I think Squirrel White, who's also a playmaking guy at the wide receiver position, he's older. He knows what he's doing on offense. So I think that's where the trust is right now. And again, we'll see over the next 3 months. The place kicking position is one that's been brought up a lot. So it'll be Max Gilbert to start out in that role, handling field goals and extra points. It wouldn't be the worst thing, as much as Tennessee wants to put up touchdowns and score as many points as possible, to have an offense stall out. We've talked about that a number of times over the last week or two. While hitting a field goal against Chattanooga is not going to completely simulate what happens when you have to go to Norman in a few weeks, getting some real game work in front of a big crowd would be good. Remember, Jackson Ross came out last year, struggled a little bit early on as the new starting punter, and as the year went along, he was perfectly fine. Now they have a ton of confidence in him. Getting Gilbert some work as the place kicker, that is another one of the questions at the start of the season.
Good stuff, Josh, man. It's going to be fun to kind of watch how it all plays out tomorrow, and then next week we'll talk about a really good, really big game against NC State. Thank you, man.
You got it. Thanks, guys.
So Josh will join us on Fridays throughout the college football season to break down Tennessee games, and we appreciate him.